I'm going to talk about going global, one of the key kind of elements of the Jobs and Prosperity Council report. And I'm sure Minister Hoskins will pick this up. Indeed, we were both at a very, very kind of useful reverse trade mission kind of recently that's trying to go at how we develop new traders in Ontario and new markets in different ways, and I think he'll take you through it. But just to start, let me provide a little bit of perspective on why going global and why now. And hopefully, I think a little bit of it's in the profoundly changing nature of the global economy and where Ontario has to look for markets and growth. And how do we adapt to that? How do we change? And I don't think there's anywhere that's probably more important than actually how and where we trade. You know, the global drivers of change are kind of really shifting. You think about it, you know, our traditional markets in the United States and Europe, you know, since the Second World War, they've been the fast lane of economic growth. That's been a very, very clever place to be. The free trade agreement with the United States, all that. But now, post-financial crisis, with globalization, with urbanization, with the demographics and the rest of the world, we're actually now in the slow lane. And the fast lane is in the emerging economies. And they're growing 4 to 7% a year. And there's a lot of kerfuffle in China that it's moving down from 8 to 7.5. Frankly, we don't have too many trading partners growing at half of 7.5. In fact, we have none. And so the challenge a little bit for us in Ontario, if we want to grow faster than 1 to 2%, we've actually got to trade in markets that are growing faster than 1 to 2%. And yet 89% of our trade is with either the United States or with Europe. And those are deep, rich markets, but they're not fast-growing markets. And so the issue is you don't abandon them, but if we want to kind of do it incremental, if we want to grow faster, we've got to add to them. And that's a bit of our challenge kind of moving ahead. In many ways, it's like the famous kind of quote of the great one when asked why he's so successful at scoring goals, and Gretzky replied, "Because I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been." And in many ways, that's our trade challenge in Ontario. We've got to actually go to where the puck, the trade, the export markets are going to be, not where they've been. And let me give you an example of that. I went back 20 years, not too long in economic lifetimes. 1993, China was smaller than Canada in terms of GDP. We were 6th, China was 7th. Think of that. Today, China is second only to the United States. And within a decade, it will be the largest economy in the world. And all that's happened in 20 years. India wasn't in the top 10 20 years back, it is today. Brazil wasn't in the top 10 20 years back, it is today. South Korea wasn't in the top 10 20 years back. That's the nature of how quickly the world is changing. It's happening within a decade or two, and it's only going to intensify. So the challenge for us is, how do we not sit back and watch that, but actually, how do we use that to our advantage? And that's what we have to do going forward. So simply put, Ontario businesses need to go global. And this is not just medium and large-sized business. One of my concerns in Ontario is, in the research we did for the Jobs and Prosperity Council, and Wendy was great, and Catherine Houston is here, helped us out enormously, is when we looked at small and medium-sized enterprises, and they're the ones that really drive the growth. They're the startups that Sheldon talked about. They're the ones that are actually going to double, triple, quadruple their size in 3 or 4 years that they're successful. Less than 10% of them export outside of Canada. So if we don't get them in a culture, in a system in exporting, we're simply not going to succeed. So it's not enough that we pivot, but we've got to get the next generation of firm pivoting even faster. And a young entrepreneur at the Digital Media Zone doesn't think about selling his or her products in Ontario. They think global automatically. That's never a second thought to them. But that's not the prevailing wisdom in the province, and we've got to help kind of create that throughout. Even on energy, let me give you an example on energy. Energy, and again, sometimes I think too often we think that's an issue, and it's too bad we're not Alberta. I think there's enormous amounts we can do in the energy front here in Ontario. But if you take energy markets as an example, energy is forecast to grow 34% between 2010 and 2035. 34%. Only 3% of that growth is going to happen in the OECD. None of that growth is going to happen in the United States. And whereas 100% of Canada's exports of oil, gas, and electricity go to the United States. We have a single buyer, and that buyer is going to demand less, and they can now supply more themselves. That's not the position we want to be in as an exporting province or an exporting country. So energy is just indicative of the broader challenge that we face. So the growth engine for us has to be trading firms that are producing innovative products that actually understand local needs but provide them from an Ontario base. And that's very much what the report of our council said. We've got to expand our trade, our exports to the emerging markets, and we've got to make sure that small and medium-sized companies are part of that. We set 2 targets for the province that over the next 10 years, we should double our exports, and in that, triple our exports to China, India, and Brazil. Now, easy to say, but how do we do it? It's got to be you that do it. Government can help and support, but fundamentally it's business that sells things, not government. So we can't look to government to tell us how to sell something in China or how to sell something in India. We can actually ask them to support our efforts, but it's got to be a business-led. The second is we suggest that within the next 10 years we have to double the proportion of small and medium-sized enterprises in Ontario that are trading. Now, some of you may say, okay, I get the numbers about all this growth in the emerging markets, but isn't it just natural resources? So what's in it for Ontario? Isn't it just natural resources? And I think what people miss in that is that the emerging economies are growing quickly, but they're creating extraordinary middle classes. There is a larger middle class today in Asia than there is in either the United States or in Europe. And what does a middle class, a newly arrived middle class, want? It wants more sophisticated food. And as Alan said, what's the number 1 or number 2 industry in Ontario? It's agriculture. Right? But are we shipping to the extent that we can to India, Indonesia, China, Brazil, other countries? No, we're not, frankly. Secondly, it's better education, it's better housing, it's better health services, it's better financial services, and it's even tourism. Let me just give you an example on tourism, which is an important industry here in Ontario. The fastest growing tourism segment in the world now, Chinese tourists. They spend more per day than an American does outside of the United States. There are 80 million Chinese went abroad last year. It'll move to 110 million in 2015. And Canada is 14th in the list of recipients. And in Canada, Ontario is barely on the list. Now that's an enormous opportunity missed. And we can do that. We've got the multicultural skills, the language skills, the things to show, do, and see. There's just an opportunity. And also on the global resource boom, again, I think Ontario can easily get in if it wants to. Consider, resource companies, as the minister said last night, need equity and debt financing, and that's exactly what we're good at on the TMX, is raising capital for small and mid-sized kind of mining and other firms around the world. Why don't we take that more broadly? That's the Toronto Financial Centre Alliance kind of focus that we should have. It takes, natural resources have to be transported, and that takes sophisticated logistics, and it takes insurance and all those things. Many people think that Hong Kong is a shipping center. It's a logistics center. It's insurance. It's how to do it. Those are the value-added jobs. The containers just happen to be a reason to have those other services there. Why aren't we thinking about being the North American hub for that as part of the Toronto financial kind of conglomerate that we could have? Natural resources have to be upgraded. You know, 3 of the questions last night were, how do we transform them into sustainable, high-value added? That takes research. The number 1 thing that's going to actually make our economy more sustainable is research and development. And Ontario has world-class centers in every single area of the economy. So I think Ontario possesses all these capabilities. What we have to be is we have to be better organized, we have to be more strategic, and we have to be faster at execution. The pace of execution is not our choice. It's actually got to be faster than our fastest competitor. They set the pace, and we have to be better. And the competitors are Australia, the United States, and you name it. And they're great competitors, but there's no reason why we can't be better. In fact, to end it, I would say that what we have always been, and what we have to aim to be even better, is a trading province and a province of traders that actually makes the province wealthy and creates jobs and a high standard of living and an environment that all of us are proud of. And that's going to take a bit of work, but if we do it together, we can achieve it. Thank you very much.